Today I'm going to speak about a set of tools. It's called Dataview Tools for SharePoint, and it's available for SharePoint Online, SharePoint 2019, and Teams. And this is a set of SPFx web parts. And what we've tried to do here is to really provide a super flexible tool that will answer the most common data retrieval, data aggregation, and display requirements. So all-in-one tool that really answers the most common requirements. So what we have here is a web part in this tool set, which is called Dataview Plus, and another web part which I will show also, which is the shared filter. And actually, this Dataview Plus includes several sub web parts included, and all these web parts are actually doing quite the same thing. They aggregate data from various sources and display the aggregated data using all kind of ready-to-use controls. So it's like once you connect your data, it's like Lego to pick the right controls for the display and then configure them. That's the idea. So before I show you how I configure it from scratch, just a couple of screenshots just to give you an idea of what you can do with it. So here you have an example of the Dataview Plus connected to Azure Active Directory on the top left, and on the right corner you see it's connected to OneDrive. In both cases, we're using one of the available data sources, which is Graph API. And we're using a table control where we select the exact columns that you want to display, the paging, and so on. Another example of exactly the same web part is these calendars. The big calendar is configured also to use the Graph API data source, this time connected to Exchange Online. And you see here in the middle, I'm using a calendar control, which is quite standard, showing monthly, weekly, daily agenda, whatever views you use to work with calendars. You can also see here, this is my personal calendar. You can see above it some filters. This is again another one of the available controls, and you can configure the exact filters that you want to provide your end users, and you see legend below and color coding and so on. On the right side, you see the same web part, just using different controls. This is an agenda view, and also here the data sources are configured to connect to a shared calendar and below to a group. This is another example. Another example, which is very common, is an organization chart. And again, first of all, we connect it to a data source. In this case, it's connected to a SharePoint list, but we could connect it also to Azure Active Directory or to SharePoint profile service or to Excel file. We try to support all kind of data sources. Above, you can see configured filter, and also here we configured another available control, which is the tabs control, allowing us to group organization charts by department. So every tab, once you click it, will display the relevant departments organization chart. And of course, the org chart control itself is super flexible with the colors and themes and all kind of layout settings. Actually, this is the same org chart, but configured to display a tabular view, more like a phone book. So we added here more filters because you're looking for someone. And also we configured, if you see on the right, every item here, every person on this table has these icons on the right. These are called item actions, and these are also configured. For example, we've configured the third one to call the user to his phone number. So this is also customizable. It's not just the the presentation, you can also configure actions, and I'll get to it. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't have clicked this one. It will take me to the actual example. Okay, this is another org chart. I won't delay on it. Another example is the picture gallery, all kind of picture gallery controls. This is the pile, photo pile control. Now, this is the next step, and I will show a live demo of this, of course. Beside the fact that we have all these web parts that can connect to all kind of data sources and display it in configurable way, the next step is to have a kind of a dashboard, meaning multiple web parts, each connected to its own data source, configured to display it in a certain way. And then we would like also to have a kind of a shared filter that affects all these web parts on the page, right? So this is also possible with the shared filter web part. And of course, all these web parts are SPFx web parts, and we're using also the Microsoft Fluent UI. So it is truly responsive UI. It looks amazing, both on desktop and also on mobile devices. The same web part supports also, besides the calendar, org chart, table, list, all kind of ready-to-use controls. We also got a control called custom control. And with the custom control, you can really display any custom HTML layout connected to a data source. For example, here on the left, you see the risk chart, which aggregates risks from multiple project sites and display it in a risk matrix format. But you can use any custom HTML layout that you need and connect it to any data source. Okay, so enough with the slides. What I'd like to do, just to show you the concept, I'll start a simple example really from scratch. So you'll see the end user experience, and then I'll get to more advanced examples and their configuration. So now we'll start really from fresh example. So I got here an empty page. I'll just get to this example. Yeah, okay, so let's edit this page. You know what, let's make it bigger, like this. And let's add the Dataview Plus web part. Okay, I got it here. And as you see, you see nothing because it's not connected to a data source yet. So I should click here, configure data source, or here, it's the same thing, okay? So, and here I can add data sources. Let's add a single data source, and I'll call it event budget request, because I'm going to connect to this data source. And here I'm selecting that data source type. And as I said, we support many data sources. So it can either be an Excel file, which is located in SharePoint, Graph API, if I want to connect to any Microsoft 365 resource, such as Azure, Active Directory, Exchange Online, OneDrive, and so on. I can connect also to the SharePoint user profile, to a SharePoint list. And these last two, SharePoint List Aggregator and SharePoint Search, are two types of aggregation data sources. I will show an example and talk about the differences a bit later. So this example, I'm connecting to a SharePoint list. And once I select this data source, now I need to provide some properties. So, okay, which list and where is it located? So by default, it's in the current site. But for this example, I would like to connect to a different site collection. Okay, it doesn't have to be on the same site or even on the same site collection. So I'm just providing the URL of a different site collection here. And let's pick the list. The list is called event budget requests. Okay. And then I should select a view. I think I have only a single view here. Yeah, all items, so it doesn't matter so much. And that's it. Okay, so I have one data source. Of course, I can add additional data sources. We'll get to it, okay? So once I'm connected to a data source, I see in edit mode this layout. So you can see I see the data in some list view, and then I have all these controls. These are controls that present some capabilities. Now, to control exactly what controls are displayed in the page, you just click the top gear icon here of the web part, where it says configure layout. And you see these are the active controls. So I don't need the folders. I need folders when I'm displaying document libraries, for example. And I would like to switch the content control, the one that displays the content, to a table control, just for this example. And let's see what I get. Okay, so I see all the columns that are defined in the view which I'm connected to. You see that every item has some actions. These are the default actions. Of course, I can change them. I can see I have some paging here and a menu bar, also with custom menus. By default, you see these two custom menus, and there's some title here. Now, what I'd like to do is make some changes here. Okay, so let's start slow. I'd like to group the displayed items here by city. So I'm going back here to the layout control gear icon, and I'm adding the groups or tabs control. Okay, and now I have tabs, and by default it's grouped by the active column. But if I want to group by another column, all I need to do is just pick the column and drag it and drop it here. And now the items are grouped by the city. Okay. Okay. And let's say I'd like to change it from tabs to accordion sections. So I can go here and change it to groups. And this will give me a different layout. Okay. This is a group accordion section grouping. Again, just whatever you need. Okay, so let's change it back to tabs. Now, next thing I'd like to do is enable users to do some filtering to find data. Yes, well, most commonly you won't have 5 items in your list. You might have thousands of items. So a good practice is to give end users the ability to find what they're looking for. So let's get rid of the tabs, and instead I'm adding the search control. Okay. Okay, this is the search control. By default, it displays a text search that searches in all columns. So if I search for, I don't know, RI, so it found Richmond Hill here, and it found this item because the city is Barry. Okay, so you got the RI. Okay, and this is a general text search, but sometimes you need a filter by column. So if we want to filter by column, just click the plus here and add the columns that you want to search by. Or you can go here and let's say I want to search by budget. Let's drop it here. And I want to search also by city. Okay, let's save this and see the end user experience here. So every filter behaves according to its type. So this is a numeric one. That's why we have the numeric slider, the number slider here. So I can filter by simply changing the slider here, or I can select from the available values in this list. So let's say I want to see only these values, select multiple, or I can say all except the selected one. Okay. And same goes for cities. I can search, show me only events taking place in Barrie, but also all these filters also behave as textual filters. So I can just type and it will find it by the typed text. So these are really multifunctional filters, and we have filters for all these types. And you can decide which filters you want to provide your users. Now, let's get back to edit mode. Every control beside the basic configuration that I did has its gear icon. So I can further configure every control here. If I go to the filter control, let's get rid of the show free text, so it will show only the column filters. And if I want to see some more configuration, you just click switch to advanced mode. We do it because we don't want to overwhelm the user with too much configuration settings. So we show the basic ones, and once you click the switch to advanced mode, we show additional ones. So this is how you do configuration for every control. So if I go to the table control, for example, so you see here that you can control which columns are displayed. By default, we are displaying the columns from the selected view, but you can override it by adding specific columns that you want to add. And then if you remember, we have all these item actions. This is where we control exactly what each item action does. And by default, we provide these item actions. This one just shows the view item form, shows the item properties, and this one sends it by email, and so on. This one edits it. But you know what? Let's do something else. You see that every event here takes place in some city, and I'd like to show this city on a map. To add here an action, you know what? Let's override this, the fourth action. So I'm going here, and these are the item actions. Let's click this one, the fourth one, and I'm going to change its icon to something connected to a map. Let's see if we have something here. Yeah, let's take this one. And then what happens, what you see here is the JavaScript edit tool. So if you are a developer, I'm not, you can now provide any custom code that you want to run when user clicks this action. But since our target audience are not developers, and I'm not, we provide some snippets, ready to use snippets. So I have here a snippet, for example, call phone or show city in map. Let's take this one. All snippets rely on some columns that you must have. For example, this one relies a lot on a columns called city. You see, it's surrounded by brackets. So if in your list it's not called city, it's called something else, doesn't matter, just change this one, but that's it. So if I go back here, and let's save this, you see here that we have a different action. And once I click it, it will open a small map showing the city that, the city of the item, Toronto or Newmarket, whatever, okay? So this is just a basic function. Now, let's do another thing, which is very common. Many times you need to highlight items in your list according to some conditions, okay? Some conditional formatting. So let's add another control here called conditional formatting. And this control allows me to configure rules. Let's say I want to highlight the budget request here that exceed $15,000, okay? So I'm going here to the conditional formatting control. I'm clicking add. And let's first of all configure the colors. So I want it to be, I don't know, white font. I can pick or write over, I don't know, this background. Okay, and let's give it a name like high budget. and I'd like to highlight not the entire row, maybe just the budget column. And now let's add a condition. So I want to highlight an item if the budget is greater than, let's say, 15,000. Okay, so we got just these two that are more than 15,000. Okay, so this way you can add additional rules to highlight your items. So altogether, we saw very simple settings, and you can do a lot more, like add additional data sources and add more grouping and tabs and so on. But I think it gives you the main idea of how this works. You connect to a data source, then you configure all these controls to get exactly what you want. Okay. Now, above that, many users ask me, okay, but what do we do if we want to change the font sizes, the colors, the backgrounds, like the styles? Okay, so that's not a problem. You just go here. You go here, and you see here that you have custom styles. And here, you got this CSS editor where we expose all the styles of all the controls that we're using, like the table styles, the list styles, conditional formatting, everything. So you can really change everything. And once you select any of the components here, you'll get the exact style. So now you can say, okay, I want the font to be 14 pixels and so on. Okay, so you can also override our styles. And finally, once you configure this web part, and let's say you want to have the exactly same web part configured elsewhere, let's say in your production environment, you don't have to repeat everything. You just can export the data source, export the layout, and then import into your web part, which is in another tenant, in another sub-production, whatever. Okay, so these are the basic functionality. What I'd like to do now is go one step ahead and show you some more advanced scenarios here. Okay, so let's go back to my slideshow just to make sure I'm on track here. Okay, so next example, I want to show you calendaring solutions. Maybe before that, yeah, let's show this one. Okay, so let's open another browser that I have here with different tenant. Yeah, so basic thing I want to show you is a calendar with overlay. Many times you need to display multiple calendars in one calendar, what I call overlay of multiple data sources, and maybe display each data source in a different color. Okay, so what you see here is static overlay, and I'll explain static versus dynamic aggregation. And so I configured this to connect to, I'll show you the connections shortly, but what you see here, I configured the filters. I also configured the tabs control to group events by meeting room. Meeting room is one of the properties, the location property of every event. So this allows me to see events by meeting room. And I configured it to show monthly, weekly, daily. I'll show you everything right now. So let's go to edit mode. And first of all, let's look at the data source and why we have these colors. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So going to the data source settings, here you see that I don't have one data source. I have 3 data sources, right? So let's look at them. One data source is called, I called it get together. It's a SharePoint list data source, like before. And I'm connected to the current site to a list called team calendar. So I'm connected to the a local calendar list, and I'm showing a view which is called Get Together, and the view does the filtering for me, right? And when you connect to a calendar type, unlike a regular list, calendar requires mapping of columns, because every event, in order to display it in a calendar view, we must have some properties. And actually, these are two mandatory properties. Every event must have a subject. This is what we display for every item. And every event must have a start date and time. Otherwise, we cannot display it on the calendar, right? All others are optional. So this is the mapping. And then we also configured color coding per source. So this one is colored and background and icon like this. And same thing we did with birthday and meeting. These two additional data sources actually connect to exactly the same list. I could connect it to a different list, but in this example, it's connected to the same list. The only difference between these data sources is the view. The birthdays data source is connected to the same list, but to a birthday view, which again filters the events by category equals birthday. Okay, and same thing I did with meetings. So the only difference between these data sources are the view, which they are connected, and of course the color coding. And this what makes this display these events with these different colors. Now, the tabs are configured in a very simple way. If I click here on the tabs control, you see that I just grouped by the location property. And let's go to the calendar control to show you some settings. So by default, you see the monthly view because I configured it to show by default the monthly view. You can add additional views, and there are more views if I want to show, like all these, agenda, annual view, and so on. There are some standard properties every calendar must have, like do you want to show only business days? Do you want to show the calendar in your own time zone or in the site's time zone? This is very important when you're showing SharePoint events. If you're connecting the calendar to Exchange calendar through Graph API, which I will show you, then you don't need this because by default, Exchange will take care of it. But SharePoint doesn't take care of it. So if you want your users to be connected from different time zones to calendars on your SharePoint, then you should add switch this to on, so each one will see the time in his local time zone. If I switch to advanced mode, you got some more properties here, like start and end time of business hours. What do you want to happen when user clicks an event? You can also change that behavior. You can control exactly what text is displayed for every event here. Let me just show you the default behavior here. So let's go here and click some. So when you click, of course, we open the view item. Oh, in this case, I change it. We open the edit item, but I control it. What I want to happen when you click it, I configured it, I guess, in previous demo to open the edit item and not the view item. But I can, again, I can redirect the user anywhere I want. I control what happens when user clicks an item here. Okay. Another example that I want to show you is more realistic. You know, what's the problem here? The problem with this example that I just showed you is that the aggregation from multiple data sources is static, which means here I connected to 3 data sources. But imagine I need to display, I have projects, and every project has a site, and maybe has a team calendar site in that project. Maybe I have 20 projects, and every month we have two more projects. So if I want to display all these project calendars in one calendar, I would have to actually manually add 20 data sources, and every month add 2 more and 2 more. So it will require maintenance. And beside the fact that in out-of-the-box SharePoint, it's impossible to pass the 10 10 calendars, I think, it's also time consuming. So in this case, we would like to use dynamic aggregation, which means don't ask the user to manually add data sources every time he wants to aggregate from additional list, but run some kind of a query that finds all relevant lists that need to be aggregated and adds their content according to some query to the displayed events here. And this is what we're doing here. So here we have a calendar that displays milestones from multiple projects located under some site. So every project has a subsite, and all these subsites are located under some top-level site. And we wish to dynamically aggregate from the milestones list all events that answer some criteria. And when a new project subsite is added, we won't need to change this calendar. It will automatically aggregate from it. So let's see how this is configured. So I'm going to here to the data source. And this time, you see that I have a different type of data source. It's not a SharePoint list anymore. It's the SharePoint list aggregator. And the SharePoint list aggregator data source runs a query against one or more aggregation scopes. Okay, so how do we configure or define the query that we want to run? No need to write any query language, not SQL or not Camel. You don't need to do it. We're using a mechanism that already exists in SharePoint. And in SharePoint, we have list views. A list view, you can look at it as a query definition, because a list view defines the columns that you want to get and the filter criteria and also the sorting criteria. So you can look at a list view as a query definition. And that's what we're asking you to select in this section. Select the aggregating list view. So here you just say where this list is located and which list and which view. We don't care about the data in this list. We are just using this list view definition to run the query. Okay, so now on what lists we want to run this query? This is where we go here to aggregation scopes. Here you define the scopes on which this query will run. And you can see that I configured one scope. I can create more, which is called all project subsites. Let's see its definition. So the aggregation scope is a specific site and all the subsites below. So no matter how many subsites there are, and if I add more tomorrow, in what level, it doesn't matter, it will run on this entire tree of sites. And here you configure the root site, which can be on this site collection or on a different site collection, we don't care. And then you got a set of properties which allows you to limit the aggregation scope. So actually, I don't want to run this query on all the sites in all on all the lists in every site. I just want to run it only on lists that their name ends with milestone. And I could also limit, if I wanted, the search scope here, the aggregation scope, by the list types. It could be one or more list types. And finally, I could also limit by the content type. And then I just mark it as enable. That's it. And this way I can configure multiple aggregation scopes. So with one aggregation scope, I can actually aggregate tens or hundreds of lists. Don't need a data source per list, because one aggregation, one data source here runs aggregation. Now there's another data source type which aggregates data from SharePoint, and this is the SharePoint search data source. The difference is that the SharePoint search runs a lot faster because we're using the SharePoint search API where in SharePoint List Aggregator, we actually run a query, a cross-site query. A cross-site query is less effective, less performance-wise if you need to aggregate now multiple site collections and hundreds or thousands of sites. You'll start feeling the performance for sure. So if you really need a cross-tenant query and a big one, you better use the SharePoint search. So what's the downside of SharePoint search? In List Aggregator, there's nothing to configure here. You just select List Aggregator, configure the search scope, the aggregation scope, that's it. In SharePoint search, you rely on that SharePoint, that search was properly configured with the managed properties, and everything was configured properly for search to run properly and retrieve everything, including search scopes and everything. So you need the admin to properly configure search for this. So there's an overhead. So it's up to you what you prefer, which one. Okay, so this was about the SharePoint search with calendars, or aggregation with calendar, dynamic aggregation. And these were the sites from which I aggregated. Okay. Next thing I want to show you. Yeah, well, we'll skip this because of time limits. Let's go to more dashboard scenarios. So up until now, I showed examples of a single Dataview Plus web part configured as a list, configured as a calendar, connected to some data sources. Here, I'm moving to a more of a solution, which includes multiple web parts that should together give you a broader look, like a dashboard that gives you several indicators, several views that together make a dashboard that gives you the big picture. And usually in dashboard, you will need also some shared filters that affect all these views in the page. So let's go to my next example. Okay, so let's refresh it just in case. Okay, so let's make it a bit bigger. So I have here two web parts. One is actually aggregating tasks or milestones from multiple project sites, like in the previous example, actually. And it's configured to show these columns and these tabs to aggregate by the priority and so on. Each milestone can be billable. And if it's billable, you see here under the is payment column, it's yes. Let's click this item action to see its properties. So you see that some milestones are billable. This is not billable, so you don't see any money here. But if we take this one, you'll see that it is billable. And as for team calendar, again, this one also aggregates events from multiple project sites, and every event has its properties. Here also, there's some of the events here are billable milestones, so you see it and you see the payment if it's a billable milestone. There are categories for events. Some are meeting events. Some are birthday, I think here. Let's see. Yeah, this one is a birthday, and different colors. Nothing is new here. Okay. Now, here I have a shared calendar, and for example, if I want to show only billable items, it should affect both these lists. So let's click apply. And you see here that on the left, you see only items where is payment says yes. And in the team calendar, you see only billable events. And same goes for, let's say, I want to see only items where the project manager is shy, for example. So again, it will filter by these shared filters. Now, how do you configure these shared filters? Just show you really quickly. It's not complicated. The shared filter web part allows me to create mapped columns. Once I create a mapped column, I can add filters, connect the filter to one of the mapped columns, and then on the filtered web part, connect them to the same mapped column. So through this mapped column, I can filter every consumer, every filter web part. So it goes like this. If I go here to column mapping, there are some ready-to-use columns, but I created these ones, which match the controls that I have here: billable, due date, and employee. Okay. And once I create these filters, then I create these controls. And for example, let's go to project manager control. So this control was configured to search in the employee mapped column. Okay, and I can control its exact type of control and what operator to do. So this is how I create all these controls. And now the last step is to go to each of the web parts that need to be filtered and map them also to the same mapped column. So if I go here, the data source, and go to column mapping, you'll see at the end, custom column mapping. And here you see every mapped column starting with DVP dash. So here I'm mapping each one of them. So this is how you create a connection between every filtering control and a consumer web part. Now I'm taking this one step ahead, and I'm going to my next example, which is called HR Explorer. And here you don't see a general filter. What you see here, a shared filter, here you see actually a solution. This one is used to manage all the existing employees' evaluations and tasks and so on. And what you see here is 3 Dataview Plus web parts. It's the same web part, the one on top, and there are 2 below. And using this, here I'm using a mechanism which is web part connections. So when I'm selecting an employee on the top, it will allow me to filter the 2 below. So we have here 3 web parts. Each is connected to a different data source. Yeah, and this one actually is 2 web parts in 1 web part. I didn't show you how you can do it, but you can do this also. In this case, I configured the top web part to be a filter provider, and it provides its filter to the 2 web parts below, each connected to a different data source. So this is how you can create a one-to-many or master detail views that are many times needed. Of course, like I did some additional configuration, like top menus I configured to allow creating new item, to export to Excel, and so on. I configured this search box. I also configured these tabs to group employees by their employment term, like if it's contract, commissions, or salaries, and so on. And here I'm just using a different control to display a selected user details. Here I'm selecting the selected employees' evaluations and tasks. So quickly just showing you how this is configured to how I'm focusing now on the web part connection stuff. So you remember that a few minutes ago, I talked about the shared filter that allows me to create mapped column. And then I can use these mapped columns to filter other web parts on the page. So here I'm using the same shared filter, but without its filtering controls. I'm just using it as a bridge between one filter provider web part to the others to consume. So I just created a custom column called employee ID. Okay, this is the entire thing that I need from this shared filter web part. It doesn't display anything. Now, once I created this shared custom mapped column, I'm going to the top web part, and I want every time that I select an item here, I want to provide its ID as a filter. So clicking here, I configure the filter provider. So the current item's ID will be sent to this shared mapped column. Okay, so this is the filter provider. And now I need to configure the two web parts below to consume the value of this mapped column. This way, through this mapped column, again, they will be connected to the top web part, which is the filter provider. So if I go to this one, for example, going here to this column mapping, you see that it consumes this mapped column and makes it equal to the employee column here. And same here. This web part also consumes the same mapped column. And this way you can connect Dataview Plus web parts to each other as filter provider and filter consumer to build such one-to-many or master detail displays. Okay. I'm going ahead to that one I showed you. Okay. Almost last thing that I want to mention. Yes, you can add the Dataview tools package to your Teams to display whatever you need in your Teams environment, because that's the place where many companies collaborate. Actually, it's many times more convenient than SharePoint sites. Users adopt Teams much faster and love Teams. So everything that I showed you so far can be just used in your Teams environment. So to do that, you need to go to your tenant catalog. This is where you need to deploy the Quizcom Dataview Tools SPFx package. Now, once you deployed it, you can click the Sync to Teams ribbon button, and that's it. Once you do it, when you go to your Teams channel and add a new tab, you will see among all other available apps, you'll see also the Dataview Plus. And that's it. You select it, you save this, and you'll have all these web parts available, and just select the one that you want to use, okay? And in this example, you see I added the calendar here. Okay. Before I get to trial, one thing I forgot to mention, next month, we're going to finish the upcoming version, which will include a new data source, which is the REST API data source. And this one enables you to connect not just to Graph API, but to any REST API data source. And we will also ship this with some examples, such as connection to Azure SQL, for example. So you'll be able to include in your pages data coming from Azure SQL, but it's not limited to it. You can connect to any anonymous or authenticated, such as Azure SQL data sources. Now, if you want to check out the Dataview tools for SharePoint, just go to the Quizcom website, go to the data visualization tools category, and under this, you'll see all these SPFx web parts. It doesn't matter which one you pick. You end up installing the same package, which is the Dataview tools. If you want just to use the Calendar Plus, it's okay, but it's included in the same package. You just when you decide to order it, you will order just the Calendar Plus license and not the Dataview Plus license. The trial versions are available for 30 days and they're fully functional. Another option, if you're not a tenant admin, or you don't have the time to install it on your tenant, we can also create a sandbox for you on our tenant, where you can play with the product without installing it. Just let us know if you would like.